Hello, welcome to Bards in the Basement. Today we will be looking at Constantly Risking Absurdity by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Lawrence Ferlinghetti was an important poet in American literary history. One for his poetry. He had been writing poetry for 55 years, if you will, the latter part of the 20th century into the 21st century. Also, in 1953, he opened City Lights Books in San Francisco. This was a place for the beat poets to hang out, to read their poetry, and most importantly, publish their poetry and have a place to have their work sold. It is a literary landmark. If you ever make it out to San Francisco, it is a destination spot. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see the literary devices I will talk about as we go through the poem. These devices are enjambment, the continuation of a sentence without a pause beyond the end of a line, couplet, or stanza. You'll see in this poem, there's not one piece of punctuation. No commas, no semicolons, no colons, no periods in the poem. A simile, the comparison of one thing to another of a different kind, used to make the description more emphatic or vivid. In this poem, the central simile is a poet like an acrobat. That's an unusual comparison, and we'll see how Ferlinghetti works that idea out in the poem. So it is a wonderful simile, which sets up the extended metaphor. An extended metaphor is a version of a metaphor that extends over the course of multiple lines, paragraphs, or stanzas of prose or poetry. This whole poem is an extended metaphor. Assonance, the repetition of the sound of a vowel. Alliteration, the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. And imagery. Imagery is a vivid and vibrant form of description that appeals to the reader's senses and imagination. Typically, we think of imagery in a limited way. We think of imagery as what we see on the page, what we can visualize in our mind's eye. But I think that great writers, poets and novelists, will use imagery to appeal to the five senses, sensuous language, language that appeals to the senses, all the senses, if you will. All right, so those will be the literary devices I will mention as we go through the poem. Let us hear the poem. And then I'll start walking through some of these ideas. Here we go. Constantly Risking Absurdity by Lawrence Ferlinghetti. Constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience, the poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme to a high wire of his own making, and balancing on I-beams above a sea of faces, paces his way to the other side of day, performing entranchettes and sleight-of-foot tricks and other high theatrics, and all without mistaking anything for what it may not be. For he's the super-realist who must perforce perceive taught truth before the taking of each stance or step in his supposed advance toward that still higher perch where beauty stands and waits, with gravity to start her death-defying leap, and he, a little Charlie Chaplin man who may or may not catch her fair eternal form, spread-eagled in the empty air of existence. Now, the first thing you might notice with the poem is the way the words are arranged on the page. It's interesting how Ferlinghetti does this. It's as if the writer is creating steps, if you will. So there's steps that the writer is creating with the line length, and the arrangement of the words on the page, and that reinforces the idea here: constantly risking absurdity and death whenever he performs above the heads of his audience. The poet, like an acrobat, climbs on rhyme. So I want to suggest that, one, the line length suggesting stairs or ladder, if you will, and the poet is climbing on rhymes of his own making to a high wire of his own making. So we have that kind of idea with the way the words are arranged on the page. I also want to suggest that the way the words are arranged on the page, you'll see that constantly risking absurdity and death. And then we go back a little bit whenever he performs above the heads. Now, above the heads is not the same, doesn't begin at the same spot as and death. So we have as if the poet's lines are going back and forth, a little farther and then coming back, then a little farther and coming back. It's as if he or she, the poet, is on the tightrope and walking back and forth on that tightrope, sliding their feet back and forth as they advance across that high wire of their making. So I think once again, the structure, the arrangement of the words on the page, the line length, all reinforce this idea of the poet climbing and then walking, advancing, sliding back a little bit and then advancing again as they cross the high wire. All right, so you'll notice that, as I said, one of the literary devices is enjambment. There are no periods there, no commas there. So the constantly risking absurdity and death, you as you read, you keep dropping down to the next line to the next stanza, and there's a pacing there, one of movement going forward, and as I said, some of the uneven lines on the left side of the poem suggest this shuffling back, if you will. All right, so we're at the first, or the central simile, the poet like an acrobat. There's the simile. There's the comparison using like or as, and it is a vivid or emphatic comparison. We don't typically think of poets like acrobats, but here Ferlinghetti does so. And the poet climbs on rhymes, uses literary devices such as rhymes. These rhymes are his own making. And the poet creates these hoping that people will read his poetry, balancing on I-beams. And so the poet creates his or her poetry, and the reader follows the lines of the poems, word for word, line for line. And the poet needs to have those I-beams on him. Above the sea of faces, nice metaphor. The sea of faces is a metaphor for the reader. Paces his way to the other side of day, performing entr'achets and sleight of foot tricks and other high theatrics. Once again, I'm going to suggest that high theatrics is a metaphor those are the literary devices. Those are the word choice, the diction, the syntax, the metaphors, similes, enjambment, imagery. All those are the high theatrics of the poet. The literary devices employed by the poet to create the poem. And so that's a nice way of saying this. This is what the poet is doing. He is creating his poem with all these sleight of foot tricks. It ties into, once again, the acrobat crossing the rope. And we now see the metaphorical value of high theatrics. And all without mistaking anything for what it may not be. I love the fact that Ferlinghetti separated the word anything to add emphasis. The poet cannot mistake anything for what it's not. Especially as we progress through, as we see that the poet is trying to articulate a truth. So if you're trying to articulate a truth, you can't mistake anything. It has to be truthful. All right? And on their way to beauty, so the poet cannot make any mistakes. If the poet makes any mistakes, the I-beams may turn away, and the poet may fall from that high perch. The poet may lose their readers. And so they can't make any mistakes. They can't make any mistakes. And so this will be suggested in the next couple lines too. Let me slide this up a little bit here. For he's the super realist who must perforce perceive taught truth. Now I want to point out the alliteration. Perforce perceive, nice repetition of P sounds, and taught truth. I love the phrase taught truth because I think about the high wire, the tautness of the high wire. If the poet makes a mistake, chooses the wrong word, creates the wrong line. That line may lose its tautness, and the poet may fall. The poem might become wordy or slack. There might be too much slack in the line, and the poet may fall from those I-beams of his readers. So he's the super realist that can't mistake anything for what it may not be. The poet has to try to capture his or her ideas with the most perfect. The best words in the best order is one definition of poetry. So the poet is trying to tell this taut truth. Before taking, I'm back to the poem now, before taking each stance or step in his supposed advance toward this still higher perch where beauty stands and waits. Now, the poet used the word truth and did not capitalize it. Because truth is important, absolutely. The super realist cannot mistake anything for what it's not. But even more important than truth is beauty. Beauty is capitalized. And so the poet elevates the word beauty, elevates the idea of beauty by capitalizing it. Also, I love the fact that Ferlinghetti uses the phrase in his supposed advance. It's a nice line, supposed advance. There's some ambiguity there in his advance towards beauty. That they're hoping to make this advancement. They're hoping to do this, to bring beauty into the world, if you will. All right? And so that's supposed, once again, the ambiguity there. And the poet is hoping to do this, hoping to climb on rhyme. Towards the still higher perch, once again, beauty is elevated over truth, where beauty stands and waits with gravity to start her death-defying leap. Another nice alliteration, death-defying leap. And I like the death-defying leap because it suggests the fastness, the movement in which beauty and gravity are working or falling, plunging towards that Charlie Chaplin man. Wonderful phrase there, Charlie Chaplin man. And he, the little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form spread-eagled in the empty air of existence. Now, Charlie Chaplin is a silent film star. His most famous character is the Tramp. And the Charlie Chaplin man, the Tramp, represents, if you will, every person, every man, every human being. And in this poem, it's the readers of the poem. And so he, the little Charlie Chaplin man, who may or may not catch her fair eternal form. I picture the Charlie Chaplin man, the Tramp, in his bowler hat and his kind of smudged and dirty suit, tuxedo, if you will, running around like, I got her, I'm going to catch her. And if the poet does his job correctly, the Charlie Chaplin man, the reader, will catch her eternal form. But if the poet has made a mistake, possibly, the Charlie Chaplin man, like, I got her, oop, missed. So the poet is trying to advance, is trying to tell a truth, is trying to bring beauty into this world as he advances across that line to the other side, that other side where truth and beauty exist. And the poet hopes that the reader, Charlie Chaplin man, may catch her eternal form spread-eagled in the empty air of existence. And I once again I mentioned early on that there was no punctuation, that there's no punctuation, and suggests that that we're still trying to catch beauty, and existence is empty, and the poet creates something of truth and something of even more important of beauty, and we're going to try to capture that. And if we capture it, maybe we can bring it into existence. So it's a nice use of the as I said, the extended metaphor of the poet is like an acrobat, and we move throughout the poem and we see how the poet is making this odd but seemingly workable comparison. And the last literary device, which I haven't mentioned yet, is the imagery. Think about the imagery of the poet up above us. And we're watching intently, and we're seeing the poet perform all his tricks, literary devices, as he advances across that rope, skipping forward on the rope, maybe skipping back on the rope because he may have lost his balance a little bit, and steadying himself. Maybe he chose the wrong word, edited it out, and put in a next word in, a better word in. And so we can see the poet up on that line. And then we can see the line slacking if it's not a taut truth, a tight truth. We might see the line slacken a little bit, and the poet fall. We can possibly visualize that. But we certainly can see the idea of beauty diving towards the reader, and we, the Charlie Chaplin man, scurrying about, hoping to catch the truth of the poem, if you will. So that's just a real quick kind of like walkthrough of the poem. Hope it helps you understand the poem as you read it on your own, and certainly I hope you it will give us a thumbs up on the like button, if you will. But thank you for your time, and that's it for Bards in the Basement for today.